Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hello everybody and welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast. And today we're going to talk about applying for jobs when you need to use English. So whether that's speaking English at the interview or writing a CV in English. Sometimes when people want to use English at work, they first have to get through the recruitment process. And that means sometimes doing something in English because employers don't want people to just say that they are able to use English and confident about speaking English. They want people to show it because I think in the past there's sometimes been cases where people have said, yeah, I can do that, it's fine. And then when it actually comes to it, when they have the job, maybe their skills are not as good as they promised they were in the interview. So I think it's becoming more common now that if using English is part of the job, these skills will be tested at the interview. And that can be daunting. It's hard enough anyway to give a job interview. Most people feel quite nervous before them, have lots of questions going on in their head. Will I know all the answers to the questions? Am I the person that the company is looking for? Will they like me even? And then to have to give a presentation in another language is a bit more stressful sometimes. But there are things that you can do to make that experience a more pleasant one and less stressful for you, because if you're well prepared, as with everything, if you have done your homework, done your preparation, then it doesn't feel quite so stressful on the day. So this is something that comes up quite a lot, and I've done work with people in the past, interview preparation and helping them with their CVs or writing cover letters, job application letters, and there are some common themes that come up time and time again. So I'm going to look at some of the tips here, but there are too many of them to go through in one podcast. So I've created 2 fact sheets. One of them is about interviews, so how to come across well in interviews that are held in English. Some of these tips would be good for any kind of interviews, to be honest, because they're just standard, but some of them are specifically related to people who are using another language. So that's one fact sheet, and the other fact sheet is about writing a CV and cover letter. And this is more for companies that are in England. So the English recruitment process is slightly different from the German one. The way that the information is set out, what information is required. So some of these tips will be useful anyway if you're writing your CV or your cover letter, but a lot of them are based on what's expected here in England. So if you're thinking of applying to work in England or for a company where you know that the HR team is in England, then this sheet will give you some useful tips so that you can see the differences between the recruitment processes, particularly in Germany, because I don't know where else people are listening to my podcast and what the systems are like there, but I am familiar with the German system and I can make comparisons between that and the English system. So in each fact sheet there are 20 tips. So 20 tips on interviews and 20 tips on the CV application and cover letter. And if you want those, you can come to my show notes page for this episode, which is www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 17. And there you can request one or both of these fact sheets with the tips. I'm going to go through a couple of tips now, so that will give you an idea, but to get the full 40 or to get 20 of the tips, then you need to request it on the show notes page, which is www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 17. And this will only work if you spell my name right. It's amazing how many people misspell my name. So English with Kirsty. Kirsty is K-I-R-S-T-Y, not K-R-I-S-T-Y. That's a different name. It's not my name, and my website doesn't work if you put that name in. Okay, so preparing for the interview. Good preparation starts really as soon as you know you've got the interview, um, and you can do some research about the company. Obviously that helps. If you know you're going to go into a company, you want to find out about the company's values, what the company's doing, that kind of thing. Have a look at their website. But also language practice is good, because it's not the same as if you're having a conversation with somebody over coffee. This is very specific to you and your CV. So you won't know exactly what they're going to ask you. Nobody ever does, but you can make sure that you feel confident talking about yourself, your experiences, your previous employment history, and your ideas. So make sure that you feel happy doing that in English, because a lot of people just think, oh, okay, yeah, I know what I want to say, I'll just work it out in English on the day. But that's not ideal, because if you start practicing beforehand, you'll know if there are any words that you don't know. You can look them up. If there's a particular idea and you're not sure how to get that across in English, you've got some time to think about it if you do this work before the interview takes place. If you know someone who speaks English who could do like a mock interview with you, and think about some possible questions and ask you, then that sometimes helps, because it gives you practice in how you would form the answers to those questions, or how you would talk about yourself and your previous experience. So that helps. But even if you don't do that, you can do this on your own. Think about the kind of things that you'd like to say. Maybe make some notes, but then as I say with presentations, don't just bury your head in your notes and read from them, because that won't make a good impression. They want you to be spontaneous as well, and not just to read from your notes. So also be yourself. It's really hard to be yourself when you're speaking another language sometimes, because you're very focused on the language, but they want to know you as a person. And although having the interview in English is to test your English skills, they also want to know your ideas and about you. So don't try to make the language so complicated that you tie yourself in knots and get really confused and frustrated, but also make sure that you don't just play it safe with really safe, structured answers that are grammatically fine, but that don't give all the information that you could give. Because the whole point of the interview is for the interviewer to get to know you as an individual and to see what you will bring to the company. So don't let your nerves prevent you from saying all the good things that make you stand out from everybody else. And also, some of the answers are going to be short. Some of them may have several parts to them, like why do you want this job often comes up. You may have several reasons for that. Some of them will be a bit longer, where you maybe have to give an example of something that happened and how you would deal with or have dealt with a particular situation. And if you're telling a story, make sure that you can make it flow as a story. So think of joining words that you can use to make your sentences follow on from each other nicely, rather than individual sentences that don't really fit together very well. So if you're telling a story, maybe practice telling those as well. Giving an account of something is maybe better than telling a story here, but make sure that if you've got longer answers, that you can tell it in a way that makes sense chronologically. Like, for example, what was the problem, how did you resolve it, and what was the outcome. And that's another thing, people often forget the outcome, so they explain what happened in a particular situation, but they don't show why they contributed to something that was really good. So what was the outcome for the company? How did this help the employees? How did this save time or money or improve customer satisfaction, or whatever it was? Don't forget to highlight how your actions benefited the company or the customers in some way, because sometimes that's something people forget. They tell the story, but then they don't show what the result of that was. Immediately before the interview, or a couple of days before, you can also do other things. It doesn't have to be all job related. Sometimes just talking to people in English, or reading an English book, or watching something in English will help you too, because it's getting your brain in English mode, thinking in English, seeing English around you. And if you know that you're going to have to give a presentation, it's or to do an interview, then it's good to do something that will help your brain to be in that English mode, and then it will be easier to continue talking in English rather than coming in cold from not doing anything in English for a week or something and then expecting to be able to give your best. So there's only so much you can do, but find something that you enjoy doing and try doing that in English as well. So you're practicing for the interview, but you're also doing something that's fun, but that will still help you to be ready to give your interview in English. And it's okay to be nervous. Most people are nervous at interviews. I've interviewed people, and when I've done that, they were all pretty nervous. Some people hid it better than others, but it's natural. And particularly if people know that you're speaking in a language that isn't your native language, then it's natural to be nervous when you're doing that as well. That's to be expected. But just think about your breathing and think about ways to try and calm yourself a bit before you go in. And if the nerves are because of your language, then remember that the language is only part of what you're doing. Yes, it is being tested, but they want to see your personality too. So try not to focus so much on the language that you don't get across your good ideas and the things that make you unique. And something that always helped me when I was doing job interviews was to see it as an opportunity to interview the company as well. So it takes some of the pressure off you if you're thinking, okay, well, do I really want to work here? Do I like it here? How was the journey here? Do I like these people? Do I agree with what they're saying? So all these things are giving you the chance to think, okay, is this going to be the right move for me? Rather than just seeing it as I have to give a performance, I have to do my best. You do have to do your best, obviously, if you want the job, but it's a two-way process too, because I can think back to an experience that I had where I went for a job interview. It was a complete nightmare getting there. There was snow. It was in London. The trains were delayed. It was a complete nightmare getting there. I did get there. I did the interview and I came out and I really didn't want the job for a number of reasons, but I knew that if I were told that I'd been successful, I would have to tell them I've changed my mind. I don't want this job. And I won't go into loads of reasons why, but it was because of things that I couldn't have known before I got to the interview. But I just think it's really important to see it as an opportunity to decide if the job's right for you as well. And when you're doing that, it's not all about you and how you come across. It's also giving you the chance to ask questions as well, because sometimes there are things that you want to know that aren't on the job advert and that aren't on the website. So it's a really good chance to ask those questions. And obviously you need to think about how you'll do that in English if the interview's in English. And the last thing I wanted to say in relation to the CVs was that there are some differences, and if you aren't familiar with those, you can waste time for a start, because you may do things that are unnecessary. So in many cases it's not necessary to send all your previous appraisals, so what your managers said about you and all the records from your previous employment, with the first contact that you make. So usually cover letter and CV are enough, unless it's a government department and perhaps more information has been requested. But make sure you know what the practices are in the company that you're going to apply to, because you could end up photocopying a load of information or printing out a load of information, sending it, and it's not relevant. And also think about the format. I can only speak about English CVs, but there are things that are different the way the information is set out. I was in an HR office at one time, and somebody had sent in a CV and it had their photo on it, and it wasn't very good behaviour, but some of the people there had never seen that before, and they were like, what is this guy doing? Why is he sending his photo? Does he think he's amazingly good looking and that this will get him the job? And I have to say, this wasn't the people that would decide whether the guy did get the job. But anyway, because he wasn't familiar with how things are usually done in England, he broke one of the rules, but it didn't set him apart in a good way, because people just thought, how strange, why is this guy adding his photo? And that's something that we generally don't do unless you are showing and unless you're an actor or an actress applying for a specific part where you do have to look in a certain way, or maybe it's a bit different in the fashion industry, but generally you don't need a photo on your CV. So just small things. It's easier and better for you if you're familiar with how things are done in the company where you're applying for the job. So this podcast is based on an article that I've written on my blog, and I'll link the article as well in the show notes. So if you want to see the written version, it's not word for word, I've just spoken about the main points, but if you want to read it, I will add the link to the show notes. And again, if you want to get either the 20 tips on interviews or the 20 tips on CVs, or both of them, then you just need to fill out the form at the bottom of the show notes page, which is www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 17. And that's where all the that's where the form is, and that's where the additional information is. So I hope these tips have been useful, and I hope you have a good week and have fun learning English. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.